Reprise de débat. Resuming debate. L'honorable député.
The honourable member for Louis Saint Laurent. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I would like to thank my colleague for sharing his time. Madam Speaker, third reading means it's the last time we'll have the opportunity to extensively look at this tragedy. This will be signed by the Liberal Party of Canada, by the current Prime Minister. This is the legalization, or rather the normalization, of the use of drugs in Canada. Madam Speaker, what's happening is sad, because what we're going to be allowing is normalizing marijuana, and it will also create unbelievable family disputes, major divisions, will lead to children who are going to fall into horror and sadness, and parents who will be helpless to face this sad reality. That is what is coming for Canada, which will be forever signed by the current Prime Minister. At the end of my speech, I will demonstrate again through the facts that this is not just something I'm seeing in my mind's eye. These are facts which have been observed elsewhere, not very far from home. Madam Speaker, we are almost at the final step, and we know that in barely 6 months, the legalization of marijuana is going to be done, unfortunately. Municipalities and provinces are dealing with the implementation of this policy, with all of the problems that it is generating. Where are we now? Especially the province that I'm living in, Quebec? Well, Madam Speaker, police officers are not ready. In a recent article, the Quebec Federation of Police Officers indicated that they don't have enough evaluating officers. According to the president of the Federation, Mr. Cote, he said that it's clear that it will take more evaluating officers that are properly trained. By July 1st, the ratio of officers will not be enough. What does that mean? It means major problems for police officers and for people who drive. We know that the government of Quebec from the beginning said it didn't make any sense to go so quickly. The government kept repeating it, but the provincial government and the National Assembly didn't take any chances, and recently they tabled a bill. I often abstain from commenting what's happening on the provincial scene, even though it's hard for me sometimes, even though I was working there for about 7 years. If there's one thing that I need to raise about Bill C-45 tabled by, or rather by the bill tabled by the Provincial Assembly, is that, fortunately, we're going to prevent production at home of marijuana. If there are people who are irresponsible enough, let's remain polite, if there are people who are irresponsible enough to allow the production at home of marijuana in all of Canada's residences, luckily in Quebec, some stood up and said that makes no sense, and it's going to be forbidden in Quebec. I dare to hope that the Liberal government will not oppose to these steps taken by the Assembly. The Minister responsible for health, Madame Charlebois, regarding a motion that was unanimously passed by the Assembly asking the Liberal government to delay implementation by at least 1 year, the legalization of marijuana. She said we're going to vote in favor of the proposed motion because we've said from the very beginning that the deadline seems very tight. When it comes to implementing the legislation, if we had 1 more year, we would be able to do a better job. Same thing from the new mayor of Montreal, Ms. Valérie Plante. I had the pleasure of meeting her yesterday. What does Madame Plante have to say? And I quote, she says that Montreal is not ready for the legalization of cannabis. She would really like to see more time. Ultimately, the municipality will be managing the impacts. We have to think about zoning, about parks. And yes, Madam Chair, or Madam Speaker, while the government is normalizing marijuana, provinces and municipalities are stuck with real problems. about this very, very, very bad policy. This bill also shows up to which point, under certain circumstances, especially these ones, the government is being unbelievably hypocritical. The government keeps telling us there's nothing more important than First Nations. We have to work with First Nations. They have been persecuted for centuries, and we don't disagree. But let me quote the Prime Minister in the mandate letter for all ministers. He says that no relationship is more important for me and for Canada than the relationship with the Indigenous peoples. It's time to renew the nation-to-nation relationship to make sure that it is based on recognition of rights, respect, cooperation, and partnership. Respect, cooperation, partnership. Those are the words of the Prime Minister for the First Nations. Here are the words and here are the actions. Is the government acting with respect, cooperation, and partnership with First Nations? Not in the least. I know what I'm talking about. I had the privilege for 2 years now to represent the riding of Louis Saint Laurent, which at its heart has the Huron-Wendake community, and I'm proud to represent them. In Wendake, they want nothing to do with legalization of marijuana, and I'm very proud to be their representative here in the House of Commons, as I was for 7 years at the Quebec National Assembly. The Grand Chief said that when it comes to our own economic development, we have very serious fears because this is a problem for First Nations. We simply have to admit it. This is a problem for First Nations. I'm not the one who's saying it. It's not a conservative or a liberal saying it. It is the Grand Chief of a First Nation who says so, that drugs is a problem for First Nations, and this government just wants to normalize it, which is vigorously contested by First Nations, especially the Wendake, whom I represent. Allow me to pay tribute to this Grand Chief, to this great man, who was not afraid to accept responsibility and did not bend, did not succumb to the siren song of the mercantile aspect of the spear. Bill, rather. They said no to an association with a medical marijuana production facility in Ontario. The president of Capital Media, Martin Cochon, former Minister of Justice, the Grand Chief said that the deal would have been interesting, but he refused it. The Grand Chief could have done millions of dollars, but he said no, because he considered that it was not a good thing. That's a leader. That's a great leader. That's someone who does not bend for mercantile considerations that the government is trying to impose to Canadians. It's not just in Wendake that they don't want this. Kistabish, leader of Abitibi-Winini, said that we don't allow the sale of alcohol in convenience stores, and so we certainly will not allow it elsewhere. Lac-Simon, Adrien-Chimon, wants to forbid the consumption of cannabis. The community that they lead has addiction problems. Even if pot is legal in Quebec, it won't be allowed. Where we are, we have enough drug use problems as it is. Where are the fine words of the Prime Minister, who claimed that he would work in partnership, that he would respect First Nations, that he was going to cooperate with them? The First Nations don't want this, and I can understand why. I will conclude with that. There's an article that was just published in the United States that commemorates, in a certain way, the 5th anniversary of legalizing marijuana. Where? In Colorado. The result is that after 5 years of legalization in Colorado, they have the highest rate of homelessness in the United States. 2 times more accidents on the road, higher illegal consumption in schools, and that means Colorado is now the place in the United States where the most marijuana is used. That is the sad track record that the Liberals want to impose, and that's why we will refuse to vote in favor of this bad bill.
Questions and comments?